to then have a bit of a discussion, because it struck us that OREF as a whole, sometimes one of the benefits of OREF as a whole is we get together and we have a chat about stuff, and it's the conversations that go on with people in the room that are often very useful. So we thought, wouldn't it be a good idea if we had a bit of an open mic session where people who may want to discuss things related to renewables in Orkney get a chance to air them in the light of all the stuff that's going on with the shutdown, etc. So that's the first part of the presentation. Second part, a bit more of an open discussion. So I'm going to shut up now, you'll be pleased to hear, and hand over to John, who'll do the introduction. Thank you.
Good evening, folks, and thank you for joining us at our second online OREF meeting. Last month's presentation plus Q&A was a feast for the brain cells, and I think we've scored another coup tonight with tonight's guest speaker, who is Robin McAlpine from Weal. Weal is a think and do tank which works to transform Scotland into a greener and fairer country. I followed the work of and had dealings with Weal for a few years, so when we launched the Sustainable Orkney Conference last autumn, I contacted Robin to explain what we were doing, and we agreed that I would write them a report on the conference which they would then publish online. As the conference is currently mothballed, Robin has kindly agreed to talk to us about the update to the Common Home Plan and new Green Deal that they've been working on, and also is adding in some thoughts on their Homes for All plan, which they've just published in the last couple of days. And basically, it's over to Robin. Thank you very much.
Hi folks, thanks so much for inviting me. I am devastated to be on Madame's Zoom. On my computer. I have been itching for a visit to Orkney for ages, so I await an invitation once humans are allowed to meet each other again. I haven't been to Orkney since I was 6 years old, and my recollections of it are quite magical, so I promise the children I'm going to bring them up sometime. So please, please, give me an excuse to come up. Right, okay, I've got about 20 minutes, half an hour to give you a very quick, a bit more than that, a very quick intro to the work that we've done and to explain what it's about and where it's come from. So let me do that. Now, I think you've been sent the links to all of this. It's based on 2 books that we produced as the result of a very big project that we're doing. We can't get into our stock at the moment. You can get these online for nothing. You can get all the content on our website. Anyone struggling, let me know, and I can fire you a couple over by email. This one is the full plan with all the details, and this one is the slightly lighter summary version, which has lovely pictures in it, which you can give to somebody who wants to know the basics without having to read an awful lot about terawatt hours. So, how did this come about? Well, basically what happened was that we were looking at the start of last year at the state of the discussion about a proper climate change challenge. Early last year. And we came to the conclusion that there was an awful lot of talk about targets and where it would be nice to get to in terms of carbon outputs and all these sorts of things. But really very little information that you can get your hands on and how you do it, what it would require, where are the weak points, where are the strengths, how we move forward, and crucially, what will it cost and how will we pay for it? So we decided we'd take a pop at this, and we were going to start out just by trying to model some of the zero carbon shifts. What we did was we started out by getting a meeting together with a bunch of our network of experts to look at the broad outline of this. So we just got together in a room in Glasgow and had a go round. The first thing that came out, and this is really important, is that climate change is only one of the environmental crises we face, and frankly, it's probably not going to be the one that would kill us first. So there's lots of them that'll kill us eventually, but actually it's going to take a wee bit of while for the climate change to really get there. Resource depletion, the impact of severe weather events on food supply, soil fertility, the impact that we're having on pollinators and biodiversity and its relation to our food system. These are all threats which plastic pollution, the impacts of plastic pollution are horrifying. These are all threats which might seriously harm our lifestyles before climate change. So that was one of the first things that we were really encouraged was it's not just climate change, it's not just carbon, it's all the environmental crises. There's 7 of them. Depends how you group them, but roughly there's 7 of them. So we decided that we were going to do that. We were going to try and tackle all 7 because, hey, we're nothing if not ambitious. So from starting there, what we did was we created a methodology. It's all described in the book, and it's really not worth me going through too much of it just now. But what we wanted to do was try to work out what do these 7 crises look like in Scotland. So to be honest with you, our water crisis really isn't that big of a problem at the moment, although it is in isolated areas. But we still looked at the impact. All the rest have clear and current impacts in Scotland. How are we contributing to them? So we tried to look at what was our contribution to all of these problems. And this is another crucial point. We kind of quite early on just drew the conclusion that if we're going to do this and we're going to do this right, that there's no space for hypocrisy. So to get the hypocrisy factor right down to 0, what we said was that this has got to be about reducing the negative environmental impact of Scotland's way of life to 0, and not just in Scotland. So if we're going to say, well, look, we've completely greened our food production, but we're importing extremely damaging foods from other parts of the world, or we stop producing plastic in Scotland, but we just import plastic goods from Indonesia. All we're doing here is living the same life we were anyway, but pushing the harmful environmental impacts onto others, usually developing countries, usually in the global south. So what we said was that not only are we going to tackle all 7, but we're going to tackle them wherever the impact of Scotland's life has these negative impacts. So yeah, more ambitious again still. And I should actually say at this point I was starting to have doubts about whether it was possible. I mean, can this actually be done in Scotland alone? Because that was another principle we set, which is that it's no good waiting for somebody else to save us. So I, as a lifelong peace movement activist and anti-nuclear campaigner, I haven't got the faith that some people have in multilateralism. In fact, I think that if we wait for a multilateral solution in climate change, it may move as fast as a multilateral solution in disarmament or ending poverty in the global south. So what we also said was we've got to take responsibility as much as we can for the way we live, where we live. So this is about saying, what can Scotland do now? No excuses. No, oh, well, we have to wait for somebody else. So having created that framework, we just worked with a very wide range of experts to get us an assessment of where we were and an assessment of what we can do. What can we do to tackle this right across the economy? Now, there's a couple of other principles that I want to just bring into here, which was got to be better. So one of the great problems of the environmental movement for me at the moment is that far too many environmentalists do have a habit of making everything in the future sound like it's going to be really shite. So, I mean, really hair shirt. Oh, our quality of life. We can't keep living in the quality of life we're living. But now, we can't keep consuming at the rate that we're consuming. But as I might get a chance to come on to, consumption is not the same as quality of life. And what we decided that was really important was if this is going to be anything other than a very serious task that we must do, it needed to be inspiring and it needed to be something you wanted. So it needed to deliver better outcomes on the way through. So that was the next thing. It has to make things better. And then it all had to be properly costed and properly worked out. So there was a whole bunch of ways that we did that. Mostly we used existing examples of widespread deployment of the approaches that we've taken and used a volume multiplier. So if we know roughly what it costs to install a district heating system in a similar country for, 20,000 people, we can scale that up. Or rather, what we actually did was we worked out how much it cost to connect one house, how much it cost to put a ring main in for one town, and we just multiplied it upwards from that. So this is the basics of what we did, the methodologies. Obviously at this point, I'm already looking at the time and thinking I'm actually to start talking about what we concluded. But it's enormous. There's a lot of it, and I don't have forever. So let me just say that, first of all, it ended up being divided into 10 specific action programs. So those became buildings. So first of all, get our buildings into the environmental standards that they should be, not just their thermal performance, but their embedded carbon and embedded plastics and other materials as well. Then we looked at heating, because it's an absolute nightmare. I mean, honestly, easily the technically most difficult thing to solve. I probably won't talk about that, but there's a very specific reason why we went for district heating, and it's because all the other options, when you trace them back a little bit, they start off sounding easier, but they end up not working, or being worse, or costing us more for a much worse outcome. Feel free to ask me about that, but I wasn't going to talk about that one because there's a couple that I was going to focus on. Next one's electricity. So this is completely decarbonising the electricity sector, which is comparatively straightforward, except we've got to get the storage right, that I will talk about. And we also have to recognise that it's quite a big task. So it's not just about decarbonising our existing electricity supply. So we roughly produce just about the peak amount that we use. But if we wanted to really maintain a renewables only electricity system in Scotland, we would need to pretty well double our current renewables deployment in Scotland. And it's important to know as well that if we're then going to decarbonise the transport system, we pretty well have to double that again, which is to say 4 times our current deployment. Again, we've costed all of this, you'll see it in the book. We can do it with onshore and offshore wind, leaving us the entirety of our marine energy assets to use for other purposes. And that's one of the things that one of the 2 things that I want to talk about. So then we had food, and we looked at how we moved to a food system, and it was difficult for different reasons, simply because there's no models. I mean, this is quite a tricky one. You will not find anything that comes close to a regional or economy-wide shift to agroecology, which is, environmentally friendly ecology, and you just won't find anyone that's taken head-on the question of food consumption. What do you do if you're consuming food from places, and these are non-sustainable farming places? So we're getting food from parts of the world just now where the production of that food is collapsing the water table. It will make these places permanently dead and barren for the people who live there, so that we can feed our avocado habit. And I say that as my partner's Mexican. And yeah, I mean, it's just the toll it's taking on the environment of other countries for us to just fly in unlimited foods that we incidentally then waste 30% of. So the next section was food. After food, we just dive straight into land, because half of what we're going to talk about is land-based. So a key part of this is materials. We've got to move away from the materials we currently use, and we've got to move into the use of sustainable materials. In Scotland, this is a real opportunity. Not so much in Orkney, but for the rest of the country. Nowhere in Europe has a higher potential or a lower volume of forestry than Scotland. Lowest level of forestry in Europe, highest potential for forestry by a stretch anywhere in Europe. It's absolutely scandalous that we don't have a large modern timber industry, or a larger and more modernised timber industry. For those that can see, this is just a thing that my head of policy, Craig, being a laser scientist, has of course got a 3D printer. So if I can just show you this here. So that's, I mean, I can't break that. That's a pen holder. That's entirely made out of bioplastics derived from cellulose from trees. So in Scotland, we can use our land to produce a completely environmentally friendly alternative to plastics, and we should be cracking on with this. In fact, we should be leading the world in it. But if we do this and we put so much of our economy into land, it would be an enormous amount of our economy into land, and we do that with our current patterns of land ownership, it will simply skyrocket inequality in this country, and that's not acceptable. So we need radical land reform. It explains how to do it in that section. After that came resources. So resources is, for me, perhaps one of the most important parts of the whole thing. It's about circular economy. It's about how we waste stuff. And that word, it's funny how much this project changed me over the course of about 9 months. I totally thought things different about various things at the end of it. And the concept of waste was one of them. It was when somebody explained to me that waste is a very recent invention. Before the kind of later Victorian period, nothing was wasted. It was all reused, recycled, or it was made with natural materials and they just returned back into compost, back into the soil. So this sudden realization that all landfill, all incineration is all an error, it's all a mistake. And then when you get to the understanding that so is recycling. Recycling is a failure. We've got to get our heads around this. It's the first response to failure, but recycling is a failure because what it says is we've not used our resources well. So again, I haven't got time to go into this just now, but I think it's one of the most important and inspiring bits of the book for me is to understand the resource loops. We need to deconsumerize. We just need to buy less. We certainly need to more or less get rid of all single-use items in the economy. And yes, I do mean novelty socks that you pull on at Christmas. You go, ah, that was funny. Take them straight back off again and effectively bin them. This is really at the heart of why the planet's in such great danger. We need to deconsume. We need to design differently. We need to design with simpler palettes and fewer embedded materials. We need to there's a whole bunch of bits that I'm actually going to skip them because I suddenly realise I'm doing the whole talk. And then we need to look at the resource loops once things go into the economy. If we can borrow it and lease it and share it, we should. If we can't, we should reuse it. If we can't, we should repair it. If we can't, we should remanufacture it. If we can't do that, it should return to nature through a natural composting process, and only if all of these resource loop options are impossible, should we be recycling, and everything that we recycle must go back into the production process of the next round of manufacturing, and we must have no waste. We must have no fly tipping. That's how we get to the societies that we need, and it's a realistic option. Right, from there we take on a difficult one, which is trade. So the bit that everybody, just by the way, I completely missed transport. I knew there was one I was missing. So let me jump back just very quickly in transport. It's another difficult one. Transport's tricky because another of the principles I never told you about was that if a technology is not in existence, it's ruled out here. So anyone that says, oh, a technology will come along and save us, not in the timescales. So if we are still at the point now of saying, well, let's have a pilot and then a proof of concept and a rollout deployment and then an evaluation and a roll back in, an assessment and then potentially a scaling up to the economy, it's too late. Too late. There's no time. So with almost no exceptions, it's all based on existing technologies. Transport's the one area where that's not quite true because of the rapid developments in transport technologies, and particularly driverless. And to put it very simply, we kind of know what's going to happen with the vehicles. So kind of everything up to small van will be battery electric, and probably everything bigger than that will be hydrogen fuel cell, right up to ferries. And incidentally, we know the infrastructure this requires. So we know how to, we know what the charging infrastructure will roughly look like, but we don't know where it will be. So the place that you put charging for a driverless future versus the place that you put charging for a park it at home future are very different. They've both got massively different cost implications. So what we've suggested is we put in the core infrastructure and we quickly develop a plan for which way we're going as we learn more about it. The one area which is I'm going to come on to as well, but slightly, there's only one part of this whole plan where we couldn't crack it. The only thing that we cannot decarbonise or get the plastic out of or get the waste out of is air transport. It's likely that within the next decade, the kind of island hopper style of flight is possible by battery electric plane. We might be able to, you know, up and down to London might be a possibility, although the plane, they'll need more planes because they'll be smaller. And who knows what the world of aviation is going to look like after the virus crisis is over anyway. But we're just nowhere near long distance international travel by air. So, I mean, we can make a bit of a contribution. Again, I skipped over it, but I really want to tell you this. If we reforest an area of Scotland equivalent to our grouse moors alone, it would withdraw and sequester as much carbon from the atmosphere every 7 years as Scotland produced in its peak year of carbon emissions forever. So our forestry will just continually capture the carbon that we're putting out, but we are going to have to think hard about what we do in terms of air travel because the technology doesn't exist. Sorry, jump back. It did resources. I was going to do trade. Trade, I'm just going to skip trade for just now, really, other than to say it's a hard one. There's these deep ideologies of free trade. This idea that, you know, modernity is based around our right to buy any cheap shit from anywhere, anytime, forever. And the idea that you might say, no, we need to take some control over the flow of goods and services and their nature, mainly goods, is still controversial, but there's no alternative. So we are proposing externality taxes, but there's going to have to be a debate because I suspect that people are not quite there yet. I can't see your faces, but I am interested by the fact that I've done this talk quite a few times now, and I always creep up to that subject very delicately, expecting the room to go, oh, we can't have trade barriers. And I've been very surprised that actually it's had almost overwhelming nods of agreement. Yeah, trade can't be like this anymore. But that's a particular kind of audience. From trade, we go to learning. So learning is just about the massive amount of reskilling that's going to be necessary to do this. And just to give a ballpark idea, in this, to be moving ahead, just to do the housing and the building work and the heat work, we're going to need something along the lines of 6,000 or 7,000 additional. Now that's additional over what we've got. Skilled trades, electrician, joiners, plumbers. Now we don't have those. They're not there. Skills shortage for this work is the biggest barrier to moving fast. And incidentally, that 6,000 or 7,000 that needs to double within the first 5 years if we're going to be anywhere near hitting our target of getting this done. And likewise, we're estimating that a proper system of national land management, so making sure that all land in Scotland is properly managed, that where we're planting trees, we're doing it well with the right approach, the right mixed species approach, that they're looked after well, that it's being planned well. We're may need up to 20,000 trained land managers. It's an economy. The economy will, they will pay for themselves, but we're going to need them. So the learning section has got a lot of that stuff, and it also explains how we need to change the school curriculum. And then finally, the last section, and it's last for a reason. Right at the beginning, we say the most important thing I think in the whole book, which is anyone who tells you that the environmental crisis is your fault is lying. They're just flat out lying. Anyone that tells you can fix this through individual action is also lying. With the best will in the world, I'd say 99.9% of the population of this country, no matter what they did as an individual, they could not get their environmental impact down to an acceptable level, simply because of the goods and services that we've got available, the energy supply, the way that transport works, the knock-on effects of all of this stuff. So do what you can, but don't let people guilt you. And we see this quite strongly. The problems are collective, the solutions are collective. We can't fix it alone, we must fix it together. All of this must be fixed together. So there's a very good reason why we leave us, humans, our lifestyle, our expectations to the end of the book. And it's because we want to emphasize that none of that matters until we get the underlying structures of our society and economy reformed so that they don't keep repeating this environmental harm over and over again. So that's the number one rule. However, that does not mean that we don't need to change the way we live. And there's quite a lot in that section, and it's a section I feel quite personally evangelical about, because our entire existences have been twisted and transformed by advertising and marketing and sales to make us believe that quality of life and rates of consumption are the same thing. And we need to get out of that. We need to stop valuing things and people based on quantity, on how much do they own. So I put it like this: if at the end of this crisis, you're standing anywhere and a nurse pulls up and gets out a sports car, or a doctor comes up with super cool brand new shoes, and your first reaction is, nice shoes, nice car, you're cool, then you've learned nothing from the virus. We've got to start to value each other based on the contribution they made. What makes that nurse of value to our society, a person to admire, is his contribution. The thing that makes that doctor valuable is her contribution. That is what counts. And this assumption that ownership, the volume of ownership is a measure of anything that we should value, we've got to beat that. And when we do, we'll get to a new sort of model, a new way for us to see ourselves. And as someone put it, it's in the book, it's all about relaxation, socialization, and participation. These are the things that actually make humans happy. And if we can create a society in which our economy drives us to relax, to participate, and to socialize rather than to consume, we'll have achieved an enormous amount. And when we do that, we'll suddenly realize that on a Saturday evening, when you see someone stumbling out of a car, laden down with shopping bags, flustered and exhausted, you'll think to yourself, oh, that poor soul, what a terrible day, how awful it is for them. Because their neighbour has got the warm glow of a relaxed person who spent a day nourishing themselves with other activities and as a result is way happier. We need to make that shift. We cannot, despite the fact that it's all systemic, we cannot move forward and expect to throw stuff away. Please ask me about how we improve lives with lower consumption, because it really is a pattern here. If we learn to make things better and then lease, if we do that, we can have better things and more things and still consume less. It's a magic trick. It really is. I'm happy to talk about it. So that being the case, and a quick overview of what was in it, what's that costing us then? Well, it's not too bad. I mean, seriously, it's quite a big number, but I want to put it into perspective. Doing every single thing wall to wall in this book would cost about £175 billion. Now, that is being, this is a once in a lifetime thing. So if we do this, every house that's currently on the gas grid will be connected to a district heating system. The oldest functioning district heating system in the world is over 100 years old. If we did that right, we would have a heating system. Sorry,
Robin,
I accidentally muted. This is something that we do it. If we want to do this, we do it right. We do it once. So we don't need to repeat this expenditure. Our children don't, our grandchildren don't, and their children won't. So this is once in a generation. So if we borrow this to fund the whole thing, we should repay it over 50 years. So it's a multi-generational thing. It's perfectly reasonable to repay it that way. So that being the case, what we did was we said, right, so it's 175 billion. Oh, and I should have told you right at the start, we want to get absolutely everything in and complete in 25 years. I know some of you will be saying, but what about the climate change targets and the IPCC's deadlines? To which I'm going to say, well, I mean, if you can find a way to go faster, I'd be over the moon to go faster. But you can only insulate so many houses. I mean, one of the things that I laughed at during the UK general election was the point at which Labour and the Greens got into how many houses are we going to insulate race, until someone actually counted it up, and it turned out that they were actually proposing, one of them was proposing to insulate one house every second. It cannot be done. We've actually broken this down to how much labour is required to do a house, because we work with experts on this. So there's only a certain pace that you can go. However, an enormous amount of it can be achieved early. There's just some of it that's going to take longer to deliver. And again, if anyone looks at this and tells a way to go faster, we'd be over the moon. But certainly we can get everything done wall to wall, end to end in 25 years. And by that point, we'll not be net zero. We'll be net way negative. I mean, we'll be way below zero. So our contribution will be there. Right, so 175 billion over 25 years, financed over 50. What does that mean? Okay, so we did an example of the financing of this over the 50 years. Over those 50 years, it would cost about £5 billion a year. Oh, I should have said as well, this is assuming incorrectly that you borrowed all the money up front in one go. Now, that's not going to happen. It would be profiled over as you spend it, you raise it as you go. But just for the modelling, imagine we raised all 175 billion on day one, and then we repaid it over the 50 years. It's about £5 billion a year. And obviously, by the end of the 50 years, that's declined to a much smaller real number as inflation erodes it. So it's about £5 billion a year, £1 billion a year. So, but, I mean, this is a massive stimulus. We've designed this so that almost all the money stays in the Scottish economy. So what we did was we ran it through an economic model. It doesn't work very well because the economic model that we use doesn't, I mean, it's too much of a change. So it's not realistic, but we did the best that we could. And let's just say that very conservatively, it would generate an extra £4 billion a year in tax revenue and create at least 100,000 jobs. And I think that's an underestimate. But it's not the only thing it does. At the end of this, if you follow this plan, for example, the entire of Scotland's energy system would now be publicly owned. It involves taking all the existing energy back into an integrated national energy company. And it's all costed. So this cost would also have a completely publicly owned energy system. That in itself would generate about another 2.5 billion a year. Just in electricity bills. So what we're looking at here is a cost per year of about 5 billion, but a generated income from the expenditure of 6.5 billion. So the question isn't, can we afford this? We can afford it. The real question is, what do you want to do with all the extra money that we're going to generate for public services? And that's the real opportunity here. Better lives, better homes, better food, better transport, with more to spend in public services if we do this right. So that's at the heart of the proposal. Now, I think I've got a couple of minutes, so I'm just going to go into two issues that we kind of chatted about with the organiser beforehand that I thought would be particularly interesting, because they are, one of them is particularly Orkney related. So let's just get into that. If you were to look at where is the closest thing to an incubator for all of our plan, it's probably Orkney, because electrolysis for hydrogen is what we're suggesting for energy storage. Now, this is not probably the most efficient long-term energy grid storage at the moment, simply because of the efficiency rates of electrolysis in producing hydrogen. But there's someone somewhere is going to take on the task of engineering this, of learning how to improve the engineering efficiency of electrolysis through practice. And given that hydrogen is almost certain to be a very major part of the global economy in the future, there's a great merit in being the country that cracks it. So what we're proposing is that we take a bit of a punt on this, that Scotland does make its long-term grid energy storage out of hydrogen, and that we use this as a way to stimulate a rapid development of a hydrogen industry across Scotland, which in its early stages will be inefficient because we're still working on the engineering efficiencies, but which hopefully quickly puts Scotland in a world-leading position on hydrogen technologies. But that's not the only opportunity that we've got. Clean hydrogen, and it's worth noting that most of the world's hydrogen is not clean in the slightest. Most of the hydrogen that you've got just now, and ironically for a lot of you have been on a hydrogen bus, probably that hydrogen was made by cracking petrochemicals. So you can make hydrogen by running electricity through water. You can make it by taking natural gas and breaking it down. And it's cheaper to do the latter at the moment. So to get clean hydrogen, really, it's kind of another way of saying spare electricity, because really that's what clean hydrogen is. Hydrogen from electrolysis is just running electricity through water. So you need to have excess electricity over your domestic and transport needs, your electricity and transport needs. And to be completely honest with you, most people don't have, and obviously that electricity itself has to be clean. Most countries just don't know how to get to wholly clean electricity, never mind have stuff left over. The exception to that is Scotland. We are swimming in this stuff, quite literally. The tidal currents at the bottom of the Pentland Firth are so massive that we've got about a third of Europe's energy resources flowing under our seas here. And it's not even being exploited as part of this plan. So what we are proposing is that we should dedicate our entire marine resources to creating a large-scale exporting hydrogen industry in Scotland. We can move the oil rigs down into the Pentland Firth, drop seabed turbines all across the seafloor, link them to electrolysis plants on oil rigs, build new ones, whatever. And then we can get hydrogen tankers docking with these big electrolysis rigs, filling up and exporting it to Europe and beyond. Now, this is a massive opportunity for Scotland to really crack the world-leading role as hydrogen exporter. And I say again, hydrogen is going to be crucial. But in conversation with Neil earlier this week, or no, last week, I learned more things. There's more options. So you can also take hydrogen and combine it. I should just say quickly that hydrogen is not an easy thing to store and transport. It's just very explosive and extremely takes up a lot of space. It's a very undense gas. So there are some difficulties with that, but there are other options. So what we can do is you can take that hydrogen and you can combine it with CO2. And Neil, since we spoke, because Craig's a laser scientist, he's been away doing literature reviews because we're geek that way. We think it would be possible to sequester atmospheric CO2, which means you could actually be taking the CO2 out of the atmosphere to combine it with the hydrogen to create the fuels, the synthetic fuels. And these are entirely clean synthetic fuels. And they're much denser, much easier to transport than the hydrogen. So if we felt that the hydrogen wasn't working, recently, before this is after the book, we've just realised that there is a potential for Scotland to instead lead in producing synthetic aviation fuel, green, clean synthetic aviation fuel. You could do the same thing, easier to transport, and who knows, we might get into a world in which the regulation says 10% of all aviation fuels must be synthetic and clean, putting Scotland right at the forefront of a global economy of very high significance. So there's loads of options there. And if a lot of these jobs aren't coming to Orkney, then we've done something wrong. Because I'll talk about this in a second. Another part of what we've got to do is remember that Scotland's excessively centralised, hellishly centralised. I live in a countryside, I mean, honestly. And our coastal communities somehow manage never to make anything like what they should from our coastal economy, including offshore renewables. So we want to make sure that this is not just a privatisation spree with equity owners, perhaps based in Edinburgh, probably not, outsourcing all of the manufacture and just creaming the profits off Scotland's renewable resources. So that's one of the specifics that we want to look at. But I was also asked if I'd have a quick mention about the report we did this week, published this week, which is called Good Houses for All, which is another key part of this. Now, at this point, I'm going to take a minute just to explain what has happened with all of the Common Home Plan stuff post-virus. So, when the virus hit, we went into lockdown, Actually, I'm going to go a wee bit further, just since it's you guys. I had been realising that the assumption of stability in global trade and food supplies is probably not stable. Now, this was controversial, 3 months ago, 4 months ago, because the view was that international supply chains were resilient and we'd always be able to get what we want from them. Now, I just did not believe that was true. And frankly, when one weather event, was it 2 years ago, when one brief drought for 1 month in North Spain meant that we went 6 weeks with inability to get, I think it was broccoli and courgettes in the supermarkets, you know that supply chains are not as resilient as you think. We have seen instantly with this virus that very long extended supply chains just break down if major disruption takes place. And I mean, I think it's become a bit of a cliche, and I don't think people quite understand it. When we say that the virus is the dry run for climate change, it absolutely is. We won't be in lockdown, but where just now we're scrambling to try and get PPE, later we'll be scrambling to try and get computer components, or we'll be scrambling to try and get food or something else. So we were already seeing this as being about a more resilient nation. So if we're growing more of our own food, I'd like to tell you how we buy exported food, but maybe you can ask me that. And if we're growing more of our own food, we're doing more of our own, producing more of our own stuff, much more of our own manufacture, then we're less exposed to these supply chains. These very long extended supply chains are effectively what's causing a big part of what's causing the environmental crisis, because it may be cheaper for corporations to fly goods to wherever labour's cheap, but that's only because they don't pay for the environmental impacts of all that transport. And likewise, all that transport requires packaging. Plastic, one of the biggest problems with plastic pollution is that plastic is the only way that you can sustain very, very long supply chains. We shouldn't have to. So the second that the virus crisis hit, we'd already come to the conclusion that the idea of a more resilient domestic economy was going to be key in the future. And I nearly said it fell in our lap. That sounds really bad. But what I mean by that is we were sitting with a model already for what an economy which was more resilient, less exposed to very long supply chains would look like, because we think that's what a green economy will look like. So we had all this work, and we just decided that people are asking what we do next in the virus. So for the last, however long it is, 5 weeks, we've been working like crazy. What we've done is we've taken the work in this book and we've done a couple of things with it. So first of all, we've created an incubator version so that it gets us shovel ready, so that it's a bit tricky to explain, and I don't know what everyone's political views here are, but it's really difficult to do this inside the UK with the government that we've got at the moment and the powers that we have. So eventually, we think that a full Green New Deal would need the powers of independence. Now, I know that not everybody would agree with that, so we're very open to others explaining how it can be done. But what we've certainly done is we've tried to make an emergency version of this, which looks something a bit like a Keynesian stimulus for immediately post-virus. And that's really what we've been working on very hard. And this is the work that we're going to be putting out in the next couple of weeks, hopefully, if I can get it finished. So that's using this Green New Deal, this transition model, and using it not to recover the economy, but instead to stimulate it forward into a new economy. And we published this week a paper. I'm supposed to have stopped, haven't I?
Yeah.
We published this week a paper on one element of that, which we've been waiting to publish for a little while, and that was the paper on housing. And so just to tell you very quickly, what we've done is we've created a model for housing. And that model for housing is to be able to build passive house quality houses for public rental without subsidy, but at cheap rents. So The model's all explained. First of all, use some land value capture. Don't pay for land with planning permission. Purchases at current use value and let the public capture the value that's added from the planning system. Then borrow over the long period from the Scottish National Investment Bank, a mortgage-style lending period of 30 years. And then build in proper sum for high quality maintenance so that these houses all maintain their value and their quality right across the piece. Now, if you do all of that, you can build as many houses as people who want them. We've done all the the price modelling of this. And just to give you an idea of what's possible here, at the moment, a kind of average 3-bedroom house to rent, heat and maintain would come to about £1,400 a month. If you use the model that we've got here, the same house, which would now be to passive house standards, the same house to rent, heat and maintain would cost £820 a month. So that's reducing rents from 1,400 to 820 as much as we want in an environmentally friendly way without subsidy. It's an enormous opportunity for us to do rapid rebuilding. And at this point, I'm going to say I haven't yet had the chance to invest. I know you folks don't have much forestry because we're saying that all these houses and their supply chains should be captured in Scotland. That's how we get this stimulus. I know you haven't got many trees, so I shall have a quick look and find out what the scope is for hemp growing in Orkney, because you can't do it from trees. You could always try hempcrete. But at least the financial model for these houses exists, and we can use this for a big stimulus. As I said, I really get excited when I start talking about this. I really find it hard to stop, but I need to stop. Thanks. I think you're going for cups of tea now, and you can ask me anything you want when you come back.
Right, Robin, thank you very much indeed for that. That was very interesting, and it has stimulated a lot of questions. So what I'm going to suggest we do, I was originally going to sort of stop for questions, take questions and then stop for a break. I think we're going to reverse that. So we're going to take a break for, let's say, 5 minutes or so. And if you get a chance to have a look at any of the questions, and Jen will just pick up if there are any particularly thematic elements in here. We'll take those after the coffee break, and then we can chuck it open as well. Start with this, but I want it to be a sort of a multi-way conversation rather than sort of just a presentation of the second half. So let's take a break now. It's 22 minutes past. Let's give it 5 minutes or so, but if you come back at past, you might have missed the first minute. All right, see you all in a few minutes. So, Robin, thank you very much indeed for that. You're hearing? Okay, that's cool.
Yeah,
We'll just wait for people to come back. So we've got a few messages come in, and
would I mean, just out of interest, you want me to just kind of work doing some of these?
yeah, I
mean, some of them I actually answered later on, so
yeah,
I can get through them fairly.
Yeah,
fairly as briskly as I can ever manage.
Well, you might have to even brisker still. You never know. So it may set a new record.
You just have to cut me off, and the poor souls at the bottom of the list will just have to have their burning questions unanswered.
I can't find the mute button. I've been looking, but you know, it's like anyway, that's fine. Right, well, let's we'll wait to the 1:30, and then we'll kick off. There are a couple that are about social policy. One about universal basic income, and another one about making sure that nobody's left behind. I think those are some interesting pieces. I think might be worth touching on. And also, there's a couple of questions relating to the fact that a lot of these lessons, or lots of these things, have been tried somewhere, and can we learn from overseas? And then there's quite an obsession with wood, because I've heard about wood, but and trees, but I've never seen it myself. But anyway, so we're on 1:30 now. So welcome back, everybody. Those who have made it back. I see we've got 36 people still in the meeting, which is good. So if we take a couple of questions on here, and then if we throw it open. Robin, do you want to pick up this point about the universal basic income, or the?
Well, there's a group of questions here which are round about poverty, taking people with us, nobody left behind, social justice, and all these sorts of things. So the first thing I'm going to say about that is, people should be aware that this is. I know this sounds vaguely bohead, but this isn't all of our work. So when we did this book, we forced ourselves to limit ourselves to what was in the brief. So the brief was environmental impact to become positive, only positive, no negative, and to do it in an equitable way. And so there's lots of other policy areas that are not in this. We didn't put a section in democracy. It was touch and go. But we've got lots and lots of democratic reform policies in Commonweal, but we didn't put them in here. Likewise, we didn't put universal. We've been campaigning for universal basic income since 2013, since we existed. But we didn't put universal basic income in here because it was kind of. It would have been shoehorned in. It was hard to fit it with the brief. You can't really argue that you can't decarbonise without one. However, if I was pretty strongly of the view that it was the way to go before, I really strongly believe that citizens' income is now, universal basic income is now the way forward. The disruption element is, there's so many reasons for this, and I can go into them all. But above all, there is this assumption, apart from the poverty mitigation, because I just don't want to be mitigating poverty anymore. That's the second half of this answer. I don't want to mitigate poverty anymore. I want rid of poverty. There's no reason for it. We choose it. We build it. We create it. I want rid of the poverty. I don't want the poverty to exist and then to somehow work our way around it. But there are other giant issues in society. So, for example, at the moment, most people think that the major means of redistributing wealth around the economy is tax and spend, but it's not. By a million miles, it's not. By far, the biggest way that money redistributes through the economy is wages. And if we move into this period of hyper-automation, and we've got fewer and fewer jobs and more of them are automated, then what do we use to distribute income, money, wealth, prosperity around the economy? So the case for universal basic income was pretty solid before, and I think we've seen what it's like now. If we had gone for a UBI, when I say we, if the Johnson government had gone for a UBI that started this crisis, it would have saved itself a hell of a lot of money. All they had to do, I've written about this, you can go and have a look, if they had just suspended debt payments for the period of lockdown and gone to universal basic income, they would have saved themselves a fortune. The banks would have taken a bit of a hit, but they'd have got their money back eventually, and everyone would have lived in comfort. It would have been a much better way to do it. So I'm a massive fan, and I think we've got to push for that now. my question is, if they're not going to do one by this point, I mean, what's it going to take for them to do one? So I'm not that hopeful. But the question of poverty, fairly straightforwardly, another thing that we debated when we were doing the Common Home Plan was whether to have a poverty section in it. And we just said, no, this is, I think somewhere down here, someone was pointing out, this is an economic transformation. It is. This is a different kind of economy. And if you look at what's happened in the process of doing this book, it's in the book, an awful lot of the damaging jobs also happen to be low pay and insecure. So massive amounts of surplus retail is one of the areas in the economy, and a lot of the poor quality service sector are the parts of the economy which really create the poverty. And they are simultaneously parts of the economy that we want to be shrinking. Meanwhile, the kind of parts of the economy that we are expanding in this book, massively expanding, are all high-pay, secure jobs, skilled jobs, productive jobs, and incidentally useful jobs, socially useful. So what we're really saying is that if we do this and we manage it on the way through, there's no excuse for poverty at the end of it. We should create more than enough income to be able to, more than enough jobs to be able to create an economy which is no longer got large low pay sectors in it. So the answer to this is, when we said we do this together, we do this together. We transform the economy together. We pay for it together. We fix it together, and we benefit together. That's at the heart.
Thanks, Robin. Okay.
Store wood produced by the forest. Store. Goodness gracious. If you're by your computer and you've never seen them, away in Google ply scraper. The highest all wood building in the world, no metal, no concrete, is now, it's the Volvo HQ. It's 18 stories high. There's one that's planned in Canada and one in Japan, and they're now pushing towards 30 stories high. Wood is a phenomenal resource. It can be used to, Scotland currently only makes about 20% of its own construction materials. We should be at 100%. And remember, every time we build a house with timber, it's locked in carbon. Generations of locked in carbon. So construction, manufacture, building, there's, with advanced, it's not just plastics, like I showed you, the bioplastics. You can actually 3D print wood, and you sure as hell can make incredibly advanced modern materials out of cross-laminated woods, effectively advanced plywood. You can do all sorts of things with it. We don't need to store wood. Under no circumstances do we need to store wood. We need the wood fast. You can also use it for fuel, but I want to take that down to have a discounted producing fuel wood from wood. We haven't discounted it, but we did model it. And let me put it like this. If you are trying to produce energy from land, crops aren't the best way to do it, certainly not heat. So we looked at an acre of solar thermal, so an acre of solar thermal panels versus an acre of forestry. And I'm afraid that, forestry is incredibly efficient at things like producing solid material and taking carbon out of the atmosphere, but it's not the fastest thing at converting land area to energy. So there are some bits of Scotland where we think that biofuels will be part of the heating mix, but on the whole we don't. And bluntly, if you want energy, use land for something that generates energy really effectively. And if you want to grow wood, make sure that you've got uses for the wood, and we've got loads of uses for the wood. But don't forget as well, another key use of this wood is that it's absolutely beautiful to look out on a landscape of forests and trees, especially when they're done properly, especially when they're mixed crops, and they bring back the biodiversity in the animals, and they restore the society, the environment, the place that we live that we forgot about. And remember, I had one person saying, but it doesn't sound very natural. To which I'm scratching my head. I said, what are you talking about? If Scotland was left to nature, it would be 98% forest. So everything that's not forest in Scotland is at the top of about 3 mountains, or it's been cleared by us. So Scotland is a land of forest that had been stripped sadly and pathetically naked and bare, and it's really sad to see. So and that also, I take it the H2 and CO2 combination for fuels before I talked about it. Radical land reform was the next one down the list, and Andy Whiteman's a good pal, and he's helped us an enormous amount with our work. Andy, I don't quite hold with the view what Scotland's got is an extremely impressive, extremely detailed analysis of why our land ownership patterns are utterly unjust and how we got here. But what we don't have is quite as coherent a plan for what to do about it. So that's the difficulty. At the moment, people felt that, oh, we need to go softly, and there's various things you can do which would start to break up land ownership over 3 or 4 generations. That can't be done here. So what we've got is, this one we had to develop ourselves because there's not one to lift, which is an explicit package of action to break up land reform now. And I want to emphasise, when you get a chance to read it, we don't want to see monolithic private owners replaced with monolithic state owners of all of Scotland's land and forestry. What we want to do is get to a Nordic picture where it's normal for an ordinary person to own 10 hectares of wooded land as an investment opportunity. So what we're really effectively proposing is compulsory, a whole bunch of stuff, but then compulsory sales orders and compulsory purchase orders to take this land, to develop it into really productive forestry, and then to break it up and sell it off to members of the public for their own individual savings for later life, so that we've got a mixed and diverse land ownership in Scotland. Which brings me, I think you were wanting me to talk. I'll
tell you what, Robin. Just a suggestion. There's been a lot of really interesting things there, but I would like to give everybody else a chance just to see if there are any other particular topics that people would like to pose or talk about this evening. So has anybody got any particular things that they wanted to say? If so, just type speak or something in the meeting chat, and we can go and bring you in on audio. If not,
right, well, let me pick a couple of ones up. I'm not advocating Orkney should be a forestry. It's your call. I'm a massive believer in decentralised decision making, but let me put it like this. I think part of our plan is that there should be a planning process for land. So not a lot of people don't know this, but when the planning system that we know was put in place, it wasn't only city centre and urban land that you required planning permission for. All land would have required planning permission. So you can't just choose to take hundreds of acres and do whatever you want with it. But the landowners successfully fought that in the 1960s and they got away with it. We're proposing bringing it back in. So what you would end up with is, no, you don't have to, we're not dictating precisely what land should be used for, but you would have planning requirements for the range of things that you can use land for, and sitting doing nothing with it. I mean, you're rewild if you want, but sitting doing nothing with it would be an option. And I just wanted to pick up that question someone else had asked about, that question someone else had asked about getting ideas from around the world. Where do you think we got our numbers from? Sure as fuck wasn't the UK. So, I mean, I sat for 3 hours with the Danish embassy's expert in district heating, just to get, I mean, that was after we'd done the basics of it, just to get an understanding of lead times and the project management that was involved. So, yeah, I mean, in this, there's not a good food comparator. There isn't a circular economy. So some of these are coming from theory, but housing was largely influenced by, for example, Austria, which is a very, very efficient decentralized housing system. The energy came largely from the Nordics, both heating and electricity. The transport, we used data examples of higher levels of electrification in other countries. So yeah, I mean, when we said this is all about things that work now. So when we said this is all about things that work now, things that have been deployed, technologies that are demonstrable, we mean that. And we sourced them from around the world, and the places where we couldn't. So, for example, food. There's a question here about food. And in food, there's just not an example to use. You can pick individual farms that have moved to agroecology, but you can't pick an entire economy. And on the poverty point, if we did what's in this plan, food would become more expensive. It's important to say that. Food would be more expensive under this plan. It'd be a hell of a lot better, but it would cost you more. But not as much as would be saved. Energy would be much, much cheaper, and housing would be much, much cheaper. You would save much more there than you would in the food. But we've talked about transitionary plans to help people with that. But that's the point. If you go to agroecology, it's a bit more labour intensive. So the food costs a little bit more. But if you look at the examples that you can pick around the world, basically what you'll find is that people that move to agroecology move up to the premium end of the food market. And that's not an option for the entire economy. So sometimes you can't really pull an off-the-shelf example, but where you can, we've scoured the world for it. In fact, to be quite honest, that's what Commonweal was originally. We were originally a project to see what could Scotland learn from other parts of the world that have done better. And that was really where we started. We did a trawl of who does better, and it's largely the Nordics. And we just said, right, what are they doing that we're not? And that's how it all started. So we always do that. Just to finish in food, because I started on it. Like I say, my partner's Mexican. Eating only domestically and seasonally in Scotland, I swear she'd divorce me and leave, because to tell my partner that she couldn't get fruit from about January to about June would be the end of it. So we're not suggesting that that's possible, but we have pointed out that already using currently deployed technologies, you can grow just about anything artificially indoors now with artificial lighting. So just about anything. There's no reason why Scotland could not choose to build an aircraft hangar and plant an indoor avocado orchard with wind power generated LED lighting and a hydroponic system, whatever. It's all perfectly doable. And to show that, we took the currently available data. So this is commercial operations currently working in the United States, which are growing indoors artificially. We worked out what it's costing, and we calculated for using these inefficient current technologies, which are not deployed at scale, you could generate 1/4 of all the calories that Scotland consumes for £1.75 per person per day. And that will come down. So what we're seeing is we should be piloting fast and attempting to roll out foods that we can't grow outdoors domestically, looking at how many of them we can grow indoors. And the everything from the fact that the biggest factor in food taste is how long it is between getting picked and getting eaten. And that's the biggest factor. The reason that you think Italy's got the best tomatoes is because when you're in Italy, they're like 5 yards from where they were growing. And it's like, well, you take that tomato, transport it for 3 days, and lob it into a shelf, which, you know, in a distribution centre and out to a supermarket 3 days later, you go, these Italian tomatoes aren't up to much. So not only do they taste much better, but if you grow indoors, you're growing in a clean room, no biocides. You don't need pesticides. You don't need anything. Utterly, utterly clean. The inputs are organic and all of the outputs are organic. So that was what we're saying about food. A couple of quick ones here. If it's okay. MMT. Someone asked about the financing in MMT. Now, I'm very careful when talking about MMT.
Could you just explain what that? Thank you. Sorry.
Theory for those who don't know. Now, I'm not going to go into it in depth just now. It's not actually all that complicated, but I always decapitalise it. There is more than one modern monetary theory, and they're not all equal. There's some I have more sympathy with in the approach, but more or less, basically, what it says is it's a way of explaining why economies don't have to run deficits, don't have to avoid deficits in their government budgets. Because as long as these deficits are not creating inflation, you can just create money and effectively move them out of existence. Now, the reason I take caution with this, and when I'm talking about it, is the difficulty is not the theories. The difficulties is that there are quite a lot of kind of, what shall I say, popular advocates of the theory who are not economists who go too far with this. So yes, using money supply, creating money, you don't have to worry about deficits, but you very much do have to worry about inflation, and you most certainly have to worry about exchange rates. So if you keep flooding the economy with new money, eventually your exchange rates will collapse and you won't be able to import anything. So MMT is a key part of all of this if we're going to manage things into the future. But I do sometimes get a bit concerned that it sometimes gets represented by some people, and incidentally not the economists, as a kind of catch-all, fix-all, easy solution to everything. It's not that, but it is a crucial part of a post-monetarist which is to say the kind of free market neoliberal model we've got. It's part of a postmodern monetarist economics, and we will be explaining this in the piece of work that we're about to do, because we're trying to set out a new economic framework. I'm just going to pick out a couple of things here, because someone says forests only store carbon for a certain point. Well, yeah, that's true. If you, but not if it's not true if you let them rebuild up the soil. So there's a whole bunch of ways that forests continue to store carbon. So first of all, you use the wood. So you take the wood and you use it, and anything that you use that wood for is embedded carbon out of the atmosphere. And I say skyscrapers, ply scrapers. Then all the other manufacturer stuff, same thing. Then remember that when the wood decays, so if the wood falls or if it becomes a natural forest, as it decays, it does give off, called compost, some gases, but not by any manner of means the full carbon contained. So if you want to know where part of the problem is, you know, our topsoil has been going like this. It's been getting drained down and down all over the world, because what's been happening is we are farming the land faster than it's regenerating. So it's eating away the topsoil, and other practices are causing it to get dusted and blown away. So actually, the organic process of forestry gradually builds back up the topsoil and captures the carbon in that. And one of the things, not just with forestry, because I'm doing this quite fast, but there's other elements of it, which is to say that if you look at just something like as simple as grass stores more carbon under the ground from its root systems than you can see in the carbon it has above the ground. Part of the reason that Scotland's got bad performance in this is bloody sheep. So we've got sheep everywhere that eat grass down to that, which means the grass can't grow and it can't sequester the carbon. So it is true that when you let wood decompose naturally, it will give off some CO2 again, but no, not all of it. A lot of it turns into the compost in the soil, and it's captured and it's sequestered, and it builds back up the topsoil. You were asking, someone up here was asking about the new housing and solar PV and what would you embed into it. Well, that's a complicated one. The reason for this, we didn't actually touch it in this. This was only a finance model. So the housing paper is a financing model. How do you do it without subsidy? That's its purpose. The how to go about building and what to do with it's contained in the Common Home Plan stuff. And in there, no, and there's a reason, which is that if you've got if you use our model, which is to really tackle decarbonisation of heating, nightmare, did I mention that? Is to really tackle the decarbonisation of heating through district heating. Now, if you do that, you then have heat networks everywhere, which means you can distribute heat wherever you generate it. And if you have got south-facing roof space, it is just a straightforward thing. The efficiency of using that space to create energy through solar thermal, which is to say heat, rather than photovoltaic, which is to say electricity from sunlight, it's just massively more efficient. So you'd be much better to use roof space for solar thermal in a district heating system and rely on wind for your energy, for your electricity, just because of the efficiency of it all. And actually, one of the calculations that we did in it is that you could just about, the component of heat that we think could come from solar thermal, by chance, it's genuinely by chance, it's actually just about the amount of south-facing roof space that's available in Scotland. So you could actually have all houses mounted with solar thermal, and it would drive your heating requirements. Actually, we think it's probably as wise to use large solar arrays, and particularly if you're using interseasonal heat store, which if anyone's interested, I can explain. You need space for that anyway. So building interseasonal heat stores with large-scale solar arrays on top of it, this is a very good use of bad land. So all those former landfill sites or derelict ground or whatever, you can cover them with solar thermals and generate heat that way. Solar PV is not particularly high up on our list of priorities in this, simply because Actually, let me just tell you the politics of it. The reason why solar PV is has got quite a lot of prominence is because it's one of the few free market solutions. Solar PV is one of the very few things that an individual can be made to purchase for themselves. So because we're on an electricity grid, everyone can buy solar PV, stick it on their roof and plug it into this electricity grid. But in my opinion, this has gained prominence because it's politicians saying, fuck off, your problem, go and put solar panels in your roof. So you will notice, if you go and look at this, you'll find that free market solutions which can be passed on to the individual gain undue prominence. We are very sceptical about the retrofitting of air source heat pumps because they're so inefficient, you might as well just use electricity. However, they are things that you can force the household to pay for themselves rather than doing it through collective public spending. So they do tend to get an awful lot more airspace than they should. And incidentally, the people pushing most for air source heat pumps in Scotland is unsurprisingly Scottish Power. And if you think that's because they want to decarbonise heating, I think you should probably go and look at the fact that it would more or less capture the entire of Scottish Gas's heating market, because you'd stick in all these completely inefficient air source heat pumps and then you'd be heating your house expensively with Scottish Power's electricity. So again, it's explained a lot more in the book. There are just payoffs. There's trade-offs. There's some ways of doing things that are just more efficient than the alternative way of doing things, and in most occasions, the PV isn't the most efficient doing it. I just one that just came in there just now, which I think is quite important. What do you do about fair trade in developing nations and what would happen there? Well, the first thing to say is we're not talking here about cutting off Scotland trading with the world straight away or anything like that. This idea that the developing world benefits from us turning their entire countries into supply chains for us, I don't buy it. So let me take an example. So many I could pick, but let's just pick Zimbabwe. You can argue that Zimbabwe does well out of Western exploitation of its land resources, but it's worth remembering that Zimbabwe is easily, or certainly one of the most fertile places in the whole of Africa, massively fertile country, Zimbabwe, and it isn't even close to food security. It isn't even close to being able to produce enough food for itself. And the reason for this is it is part of a global supply chain. What is it supplying? Largely tobacco. So there's this rhetoric that the developing world benefits from the West, encouraging them to develop their economies for our benefit. And there's a very strong narrative that says that's the case. It's not really the case if you're actually there. So these all get intensively farmed. They're killing the land for us, killing their land for us. And their environmental standards and protections are much lower than ours. So whatever damage we are doing, they're doing massively more over there. It stops their economies developing. And actually, I've come to the conclusion now that the best thing that we can do for the developing world is just bloody leave them. I mean, honestly, every version of, oh, but if we stop trading with them in this particular way, they will never cope. But I think I'm increasingly feeling that's just white saviour complex. These are all economies. We'll still buy things from other countries. We will still trade around the world. But the idea that we should be getting basic crops that we used to produce here flown in from Indonesia because their labour's incredibly cheap and because their environmental costs are very low isn't something that I hold with. And to be quite honest with you, I think they could make much better use of their own land in their own way.
So, Robin, I'm going to, I think we're coming up on 9 o'clock, so I'm going to start to draw this to a close. So I think there's been a huge amount of stimulating thought there. I really, really do urge people to get hold of a copy of the book when you can, not just because reading it online is slightly more difficult, but I think it's a really good reference document and something that you'll probably want to refer back to at a later date as we do make progress. If nobody else has got anything they want to add specifically at the moment, I think I'm going to draw this to a close and really say thank you, Robin, so very much for giving up your evening. I'm intrigued to see the guitars and the musical instruments in the background. So, so maybe we'll do a musical interlude on another one. But thank you so much indeed for giving us the benefit of your time. Thank you very much for the documents that have been produced, and I hope we've recruited a number of people who will go and look at Common Weal's work. We do look forward to seeing you up here at some stage, and do feel free to bring one of those tree things with us with you, because they sound very popular.
I'll bring some seeds up.
Yeah, we look forward to seeing those.
I've told my kids all about Scarabray, so if I don't get an invitation or legitimate reason to come up now, there'll be trouble in the household.
Fine.
Thanks so much for asking me to come and do this, folks. You'll gather I'm really enthusiastic that we get this conversation taking place across Scotland.
Yeah, we look forward to it, and my thanks very much indeed finally to Jen and to Stuart for putting this together, and for John for suggesting we made this thing work. Keep your eyes open for the next OREF meeting. They're always planned to be on the first Tuesday of every month. This, I think, has been pretty successful. We'd really like to get feedback from people, so do feel free to bombard Francis with emails about this after the event, and we're open to ideas for other topics and other conference events. So thank you all very much indeed. I'll say a safe travel home, but that's about a metre, isn't it, that way? So we won't bother with that. Okay, see you all. Good night all.
Thanks a lot. Bye, folks.